Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC, quarterfinals and semifinals, round 3, round 4, whatever you want to say, overview and analysis video. I know that was a weird intro, but with how the LEC playoffs break down, it's really hard to find out what exactly we're covering in today's video, but this is going to be coverage of the two series that we're getting before the finals, the two best of fives that weren't winners finals. And so I guess that's technically round 3 or whatever you want to call that, and losers finals or the semifinals or whatever you would like to label that one as, round 4 or whatever you want to label it as. And so I'm excited to get into these series as we're talking about this before we get into the LEC finals coverage later in the week. But let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of these two series. We certainly saw some interesting gameplay coming in from both. There is not a shortage of games to talk about in terms of this video, and so I'm excited to get into it. But of course, let me know what you thought of both of these series down in the comment section below. But let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game in each series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game in each series, and then at the end of the series, I'll be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. Of course, at the end of the video, we will talk a bit about the LEC finals, what I predict to happen, what I think consensus is kind of going into this. It's definitely an interesting conversation just because of where the LEC is situated in terms of its top teams right now. But before we jump into all of that analysis, we have to talk about the teams that are playing to get there in the first place. And so let's jump right into it. Our first series, our round 3 matchup, the first best of 5 for both of these teams. Of course, it's a matchup between Fnatic and Mad Lions Koi. Very interested to see this. Of course, Fnatic coming in as the number 5 seed into the playoffs, but they were a lot better than that. They just had a little bit of a rough stretch in the middle of the split, and so they ended up at 5-4, same record as their opponent here, Mad Lions Koi. Now, these two teams have played a couple of times over the course of this year. The first time they played in the regular season, Mad was able to pick up the win with that crazy Varus top pick that Merwin was able to pull out. I misspoke on that in the previous video. I said that Fnatic had won both matchups that they had played this year. Mad actually won the first matchup. That was my mistake. I apologize for that, but Fnatic very much won the second matchup when they played in a best of 3 in this playoff run already, and so Fnatic definitely has kind of the mental advantage, I would say, going into a series like this, and I think generally you would expect them to be the more talented team. Of course, Mad is a team that is very young and very inexperienced at this level. You've got 4 rookies in Merwin, Frescoe, Supa, and Alvaro all on this team. It's very difficult to imagine a circumstance in which they're going to be as prepared as a team like Fnatic in terms of mental going into a series like this, but there are real question marks about Fnatic that I think Mad's actually in a unique position to be able to exploit. Most notably, in my opinion, the bot lane, which has not been particularly consistent for Fnatic this year. Noah and June have struggled to find any sort of rhythm in the bot lane, especially in the isolated 2v2. Noah's gotten better, I think, as the split has gone on, but June can definitely still be a liability at times, and Supa and Alvaro might be the most consistent bot lane in the LEC at the current moment in terms of how they have been able to perform, and so that's definitely an area I could see Mad being able to exploit, as well as the top side. Oscar has just not been very good for Fnatic over the past, month or so, and so you really need him to step up. He is going to be a massive piece as to whether or not this team can figure out their problems or not. Razork and Humanoid have been great for Fnatic, but they can't do everything. You need the entire team to step up, but for Mad, again, it's just, you're expecting this team to get outskilled at certain, parts of the game. Even if I really like Elyoya, and I think obviously his veteran presence, his former championship experience, he's a multiple-time champion here in the LEC. I think that's very important for a young team like this. You just don't know how players like Merwin, Frescoe, Supa, and Alvaro are going to react in an LEC best of 5 against Fnatic, one of the most, historic teams of all time. And so there are definitely some question marks. I predicted Fnatic in this series 3-1. That was my personal prediction, but I do think Mad could make it more interesting if things end up going in a different direction. I'm excited to see, but of course, if we're going to go game by game, that means we get to kick it off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Mad Lions. They're going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0 in this series, taking full control of basically the momentum. I always talk about this. I have said this in a lot of previous videos when we've gotten to playoffs and best of 5s, but winning game 1 in a best of 5 is a lot more crucial, I think, than people recognize it to be. Just having the confidence that you can go out there and beat Fnatic, or now you only have to win 2 of the final 4, you only have to go 50% over the next 3 or 4 games. That's a much more calming experience than having to win 3 of 4 on the other side. It is very important to get that momentum early. Obviously, it's not the end end of the series for Fnatic or anything like that, but it is really nice to see Mad be able to come out and actually perform really well in their first best-of-5 game here. They outplayed Fnatic towards the back half of this. Perhaps you can say Fnatic had a good opportunity to be able to win this because of how strong the brand was on the other side. You have a lot of setup, I should say, for Fnatic plays, like for team fights, but you just didn't have any sort of consistent late game damage. You were really relying on the Ori and the Jinx in terms of that department, and neither of them were strong enough to be able to compete with their counterparts on the other side of the map. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game in game 1 is going to go to Merwin in the top lane for me on this Akali. You know, he's been pulling out crazy picks in the top lane all year long. The Varus, the Twisted Fate, those things come to mind, but the Akali, not that crazy. We've seen Akali flexed into the top lane quite a bit over her lifespan, even before she got reworked, and, you know, I think Merwin pilots her incredibly well here. This champion can take over late game team fights if she has any semblance of gold. We've seen what Akali can do at the pro level for many years with top mid laners being able to play her. It's nice to see Cassantes get punished. Like, that's really the best thing I can say. Generally, I wouldn't say that Akali's a good matchup into Cassante. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be something that is very consistent for the Akali, just because Cassante has very clear lockdown, and as long as he can hit it, it's really hard for Akali to play in the late game. But Merwin was so much better than Oscar Rinnan in game number 1 that it honestly didn't end up mattering. It was really good to see him just outplay Oscar Rinnan, and honestly, I know a lot of people are talking about Merwin as like this big Rookie of the Year candidate. I don't know if I'm on that same page, if only because I think some of his teammates deserve it a bit more in Supa and Alvaro, but Merwin's been really good this split, and he's been a very exciting player. He's been a little bit up and down. He's had some bad games as well, but the good ones are very standout-ish because he picks these crazy things and he goes out there and he's very flashy and he wins in very flashy ways, and he did outskill Oscar Rinnan in this game, and in a matchup, like I said, where I don't necessarily think Akali is just like guaranteed to win. So really good stuff from him. I think Fresco, Supa, and Alvaro continue to look really good. Alvaro's scoreline doesn't look great here because he's playing Braum in a comp where he's supposed to die first in every fight, but love Karma in the mid lane, love Karma plus Senna. That is a very dangerous duo to end up having to go into. I wouldn't expect Fnatic to want to give that over for the rest of the series because it's almost impossible to deal with the Xin Zhao throughout the rest of this back half, and then even the Akali, like later on, it just becomes so difficult to actually play into these hyper carries or champions that can deal a lot of damage very consistently in late game situations. And it's not like these champions don't do damage. It's not like mid lane Karma's not hurting a ton with Mantra Q. It's not like Senna isn't hyper carrying herself in the late game. Like, it's just a very difficult comp to end up playing into. I think Mad executed on it well, and I'm really happy to be able to say that. Going up 1-0 here is pretty big for them. But for Fnatic on the other side, not the worst game in the world. I think you had an identity here, and a couple of your players did play well. Big credit to Razork, who I think had another really good game here, this time on the brand. I have been seeing some hype get a little bit out of, you know, my comfort zone for him. I think he's been great, but I saw some conversation about him being like, it was him versus Caps for MVP. I think that's a bit of a crazy take. I think his mid laner Humanoid has been significantly better than he has been over the course of this split. Not to say Razork has been bad, but Humanoid's been amazing, and I think a lot of the pressure that Razork's been able to generate has been because Humanoid's winning mid lane so consistently and generating a lot of tempo through that lane, but Razork did a great job in this game in particular on the brand of being able to get a lot of early action going. Brand is something that has very much worked at the LEC level, and it's good to see Razork be able to continue that. Somebody who traditionally likes more tanky engagers, somebody who wants to be a little bit more of a fighter. He likes the Xin Zhao, you know, things like that. The Vi, you know, it's always kind of been more his style. I think it's really nice to see him pick the brand and actually perform well on it. I think Humanoid had a couple of good moments, but he just didn't have enough damage to actually be relevant. Noah and June were definitely the worst of the two bot lanes in this game, but Noah was never really able to get online. Got 3 AD carry bans against him in the first rotation of Kalista, Ashe, and Varus, and just had to settle for Jinx, who's just not as strong in the meta as a lot of these other AD carries at the current moment. But dud of the game for me is going to go to Oscar Rinnan on the top side, and maybe you wouldn't recognize that if you just looked at the box score, you know, his KDA, but he had a bad game. I mean, he really piloted this Cassante poorly, and that is concerning for a variety of reasons. Not only because Cassante, quite frankly, is a very easy champion to operate at a high level, but because this is the one champion that he has looked good on at any point over the course of this split. He really has been very, very inconsistent. You know, I've been talking all split long about how he's taken a pretty major step back so far in 2024, and I think that very much continued here. If he's not even winning on Cassante anymore, that's definitely a cause for concern. Now, another interesting trend to just talk about in general is that, as we saw in the G2 versus BDS series, and we've seen it throughout the playoffs, winning teams are not really prioritizing dragons at the current moment. I don't know if that's something that's going to continue in other regions or if it's going to continue in the LEC playoffs, but winning teams are prioritizing those Void Grebs, they're prioritizing Rift Herald, and then they're just fighting for Baron over the end of the game. They're willing to give up 2 or 3 dragons in the early game because they know they can deny soul if they have enough gold. It's a very interesting strategy, but it's one that we're actually seeing very commonly around the world right now in terms of like the best teams. And so it's something to monitor to see if that's going to continue. But generally, I think Mad just outplayed Fnatic in the back half of this game. Again, there were good moments. Razork, I think, had a lot of prio, had a lot of pressure. Humanoid was a big part of that, but some mechanical misplays from Fnatic players and some major step-ups from Mad Lions players really led to this 1-0 lead, and it's going to be up to Mad to be able to keep this. Obviously, going up 2-0 would be massive for this team, but Fnatic is not going to let that happen easily. They want to be able to tie up this series at 1 apiece and, stay in it, make this essentially a best of 3, which they already know they can win. But are they going to be able to do that, or is Mad going to take a dominating lead in this series? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Fnatic. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to tie up the series at 1 apiece, and we are all back in this thing. This was a really needed bounce back from Fnatic. They needed to show up and not only win this game, but look very competent in doing so, control the pacing, actually outplay their opponent, and that's exactly what they did. Game 1 was a little bit more back and forth. Mad really did feel in control for most of the game, and their team fighting was just better down the stretch, but this was a more dominant performance than what Mad showed in game number 1, and I think that's exactly what you wanted to see out of Fnatic coming into game number 2 here. You wanted to see them actually be able to gap Mad across the board, basically, in every matchup, and I do think that's what they did. To Mad's credit, I do think they tried some interesting things. They were probably only like 5 minutes away, like 1 item away from Merwin actually being able to completely change the game on Gwen, because it was getting dangerously close to, Merwin just being genuinely unstoppable towards the back half of this game, but we never actually got to that point. Fnatic ended up closing it out. They were able to win their fights early, and honestly, I love the way they played the early game. I think that's the thing that I'm going to focus the most on. Player of the game for me is going to go to Oscar Rinnan in the top lane. Thank God he had this performance. I have been very critical of Oscar over the course of this split. Hell, I was critical of him last year as well when he came in the spring split when he was a disaster. Things started to get better in the summer. He was pretty good at Worlds, and you felt pretty good about him moving into 2024, but it felt like that step back was happening. This is the kind of game that you want to see from him a lot more consistently, where not only is he able to survive in lane in a matchup that I think a lot of people would consider a counter pick, but outside of that, he is also able to be a massive force in team fights. I mean, taking over on the Cassante. Now, if there is a bit of a concern, it's that Cassante really has been the only pick over the course of this year that he's been able to survive on, that he has looked good on. If I'm a team going into Fnatic, I know, you want to ban out 80 carries. I mean, Kalista, Varus, Ezreal, Jinx, Xayah all taken off the board. Somehow you left Lucian up and he dominated on it, but I digress. Like, I think Cassante needs to be a ban against Fnatic. I truly do think that Oscar just looks so much worse on anything else, and it's not because he's perfect on Cassante, but rather because it really does limit their options in terms of where they can play in the early game, and I think, I would expect to see that more, or at least the takeaway more across the series, but Oscar was really good in the back half here, and it's nice to see him at least have a good game on the champion that he is supposedly supposed to have these good games on. It is nice to see. Razork continues to look great on Brand. I think Mad definitely has to consider taking this away as well. That's 2 games in a row that he's been able to generate a ridiculous amount of tempo and pressure in the early game because he is very good at this champion. Razork is just playing really well right now. He's kind of on that borderline of being like an A, star player. I do think there are times where he looks like it. Like in this series, he's absolutely performing like it, going into what I consider to be the best jungler in the region. He really is performing at a super high level, but I want to see him be able to continue it. It's just everything you could want to see from him right now. He is showing on that Brand. Great game from him. Humanoid looks good on the Karma. And then you've got Noah just dominating on the Lucian. You take away 5 AD carries. You actively ban out 5 ADCs as Mad Lions. And he just gets to pick Lucian Milio, and he gets to kind of dominate you in the mid game on it. I don't really know what the game plan was here. I really do not like this draft decision making for Mad. I think this was consequentially bad, game losingly bad in terms of draft ideology from them, and Noah punished them for it. Noah has been playing a lot better as of late. And I think June does a lot better on Enchanters. I think that's always going to be something that is going to push him forward. That's what he was in the LCK, not only on KDF, but back on DRX Challengers when he was kind of in the Challengers League. He was always a bit more of an Enchanter player. And so, it's nice to see this team get back to their roots, have a squad of Karma plus Milio to try and enable this Lucian plus Brand duo, and then you have the Cassante for free engages. It's a really nice idea, and I think they executed on it well. But again, I think a lot of this is going to be something that potentially gets taken away from them for the rest of this series. And so it's going to be interesting interesting to see how they could potentially adapt. But for Mad, like I said, you lost a lot in draft here. I think banning out 580 carries and giving over Lucian is not exactly the idea I personally would have had going into this game, but it's not like you got destroyed in terms of the draft that you ended up with. You had ways to win this game and you just weren't able to execute on it. Dud of the game for me is going to go to Supa, but I think you could also give this to Elyoya in the jungle on the Maokai. It's just not the kind of champion that I think he should be playing in a matchup like this. He needs to have a lot more prio and tempo. In the early game, he needs to be able to establish his pressure quickly, and Maokai's just not going to be able to do that into Brand. But again, Supa also just simply needed to be better. You banned out 580 carries and picked yourself a Felios early in the draft only for him to go 0-5-1. That's a disaster. I mean, that is a complete waste of resources if we're being entirely honest. It simply has to be better than that. Frescoe wasn't particularly good here. Alvaro tried to make some plays on the blitz, but there was no damage coming in from basically either of your carries, and so it was very difficult to win any sort of fight in the mid game, especially after Lucian started getting out of control. And Merwin was, trying his best towards the back half here. Again, you give this 5 to 10 more minutes, you give him another item, perhaps he's actually able to take over some of these fights. He was getting dangerously close at times towards the back half of this game, but your team didn't survive long enough to put you in that position. The series is tied up, and Fnatic has a lot of momentum after this game number 2. I think Mad probably really needs to win this game number 3 in order to reestablish it, and I think they need to win it handily. I don't think they want another close game. I think they want to be the better team like Fnatic was in this one, but all the freaking out Fnatic fans did in game 1, hopefully it's not all for vain. Hopefully they can go into game number 3 and continue this momentum that they were able to generate, continue this domination that they quite frankly showed in game number 2. But are they going to be able to do that, or is Mad going to be able to take this lead back? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Mad Lions. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to retake control of this series, going up 2-1 and putting themselves on series point heading into game number 4. And this is the kind of late game performance that, again, really pushed them forward in the first game of this series. It wasn't quite the blowout that maybe I was hoping to see from them. I was really hoping to see a Fnatic-esque performance from them in game number 3, where they were just better in the early game, able to transition that cleanly into a late game win and just kind of prove that they can outplay Fnatic. But they go back to their bread and butter. It really does feel like Fnatic maybe has a few more tools in the early game, and then Mad is just better at team fighting in their current state, or at least that is kind of what we've seen if they're playing from relatively even. Credit to Mad, but Fnatic now down on series point. Remember, if they lose this series, they are eliminated from the playoffs in 4th place. That would be a pretty big disappointment, I would say. Maybe not in terms of placing, but in terms of losing to Mad Lions, a team that I think a lot of people and a lot of Fnatic fans would have expected them to pretty cleanly beat. Being down 2-1, certainly not ideal for them, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game is going to go to Frescoe in the mid lane on the Gragas. I mean, the flanks, that's really what this is about. It's the late game flanks that he was able to pull off on the biggest champion in the game. It was kind of crazy how consistently he was able to get behind Fnatic, get himself into a good position, and disrupt their carry duo. Humanoid in particular really struggled with that down the stretch of the game, and you've got to give Frescoe a lot of credit for that. His team fighting has actually been phenomenal. He has very much impressed me over the course of this split. I've hyped him up a lot in terms of the gameplay that he's been able to put out over this LEC winter split, and that has absolutely continued in this series. It's really nice to see a young player that honestly people had less expectation for than players like Merwin and Supa and Alvaro step up and really be a primary focal point for why this team is winning games in the back half of the playoffs, in the top 4. It's really, really good stuff. He was awesome in this game. You do have to give a lot of credit to Supa and Alvaro, who were also very good. Noah tried his best to deal enough damage in the back half of this game to keep things alive, because Humanoid was essentially just taken out of the game. He had a really bad one in this one, but Supa and Alvaro were just doing so much damage. Supa is so good on Kai'Sa. This is a pick that I would expect them to continuously go to. Basically, every time I've seen him on this champion, whether that's here in the LEC or in the ERLs or at EU Masters last year, he is just dominating on Kai'Sa. I honestly think this is his best champion, and it's really fun to watch. He just has a really good idea of where he needs to be in team fights. He knows when he can get away with being aggressive, and Alvaro follows up on him very well. I think Frescoe and Supa, the two carry roles for Mad, were so important towards what Mad were able to do in this game, which is funny because they were kind of the problems in game number 2, where they really weren't able to step up. It's very important that these two end up playing at a high level. It really concentrates a lot of what Mad wants to do. It's a big part of their game plan. Elyoya was good on Ivern. He's always been very good at this champion. Merwin still pulling out his Varus top. The triple flex in draft of Varus, Gragas, and Kai'Sa that everybody thought was going to be Gragas Gragas top, Kai'Sa mid, Varus bot. Turns out being Varus top, Gragas mid, Kai'Sa bot. You know, you can kind of move these pieces around in a lot of different directions because Mad is so versatile, but it ends up working out for them. They get the matchups they want, and these players are able to execute. Clearly, this was the direction that they wanted to go, and Mad now has full control here, and Fnatic definitely has to do something to be able to answer that. This was not the game 3 you wanted to see after what was a pretty good game number 2, if we're being honest. You know, there were positives. Again, I think Noah played relatively well here. June had a couple of good ultimates on the Maokai, but really this was Noah trying to 1v9 on a champion that just doesn't really have that potential. Razork's engages were not nearly as good. His early game was significantly worse than it was on the brand. I think that's definitely something we're going to be seeing down the stretch. You maybe take away the brand, put him on something like the Rel. Maybe he can't be as active in the early game. Maybe the tempo is going to slow down a bit, but I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Humanoid played probably his worst game of the entire split. He has been so good and so consistent that it's really frustrating to see a big moment where he is actually letting this team down. It's almost like the opposite of what we've come to expect from Humanoid, where these boring, worthless regular season games, he just kind of takes off. It doesn't really matter. He's not necessarily playing as focused. And then when we get into the best of fives, the games that really matter, he steps up and is one of the better mid laners in Europe. It's kind of the opposite. He was amazing in the regular season. We really didn't see any semblance of him, you know, taking games off. And now that we're in the best of five stage, like, he's having the worst game of his season up until this point. I think he will be better as the split, or as the series goes on, I should say, because he's Humanoid and he's built for big moments, but this was a really bad Hui game. He got dominated in lane, was really not able to actually generate any sort of momentum or pressure on that side of the map, you know, through the middle, and Frescoe really had a lot of it. And then once we got into team fights, he was consistently getting caught out. He had no idea, even when Frescoe was on a ward, to play a lot safer. He was just playing a lot more ego in this game, and it very much cost him. He was a big damage threat throughout this game, and it just didn't really matter. The Hui never ended up being relevant. Oscar also lost on the top side, playing Jace into Varus. Not the easiest matchup in the entire world, but certainly one that is winnable for Jace, and certainly something that he shouldn't lose nearly as hard on. But Mad just feels so much more cohesive in the back half of these games, and that's a big reason why they're able to take them so cleanly, is that they are more of a team fight oriented team. Frescoe looks great in the back half of these games. Merwin has looked great in this series. Elyoya, you know, is going to be a great enabler, and Supa looks great on hyper carries, and so the formula has been found out for Mad. Fnatic just has to generate more tempo in the early game. I think that's definitely going to be a strategy for them moving into the rest of this series, but they're going to have to do it now. Again, they're on series point. If they lose this next game, they are eliminated, and Matt has the potential to move in to the semifinals with a win here. Are they going to be able to do that, or is Fnatic going to bring us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Fnatic. They are going to take game number 4. They're going to tie up the series once again, this time at 2-2, and they are going to send us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5 here in round number 3, and that is amazing. It's really, really awesome to see both of these teams stepping up when they need to in pivotal situations. Fnatic being able to make this kind of comeback, being on the back foot basically the entirety of this series, having lost both games 1 and 3, and Mad Lions obviously not being able to get the job done, but being able to generate a lead in a series against Fnatic in a best of 5 is still major. Both of these teams are definitely living up to expectations, and this series has been a blast to watch. But what exactly happened in game 4 to push us into that game number 5? Well, this was another pretty clear Fnatic win, although it did take a bit more time than their game 2 win, which I think is a credit to Mad, who was able to hold out in this game a little bit longer than maybe you would have expected given the circumstances. But, you know, Fnatic wasn't exactly on the front foot for a lot of this game, even though it might seem like they dominated in terms of the scoreline. I am going to give player of the game to Humanoid in the mid lane, but if you want to give this to Razork, I think that is very well deserved as well. I think both of them played very well in this. Humanoid was more impactful in terms of the actual team fighting stage of the game, in terms of dealing the damage necessary in order to win, but they don't win this game if Razork doesn't steal every single objective that Mad Lions ends up trying to go for throughout the entirety of the game. That really was kind of the game changer, right? Whether it was Dragons, whether it was the one Baron that was taken. I mean, the Baron dance that Matt had was a disaster. Razork being able to get in and steal that away was a game-winning play for Fnatic, but I do want to give credit to Humanoid for being the one that was actually able to really facilitate the ending of the game and facilitate a lot of the fighting aspect of the game. So whoever you think is more important, that's fair. I think it's honestly fair to go either way on that one, but I'm going to give it to Humanoid. Really nice bounce back from him on the same champion, saying, screw it, I know I didn't play super well on the Hui last game, but I'm going to be more proactive this game. I'm going to take a bigger role in the early game, and I'm going to be able to carry us in the back half of these team fights because of the damage that I'm able to put out, and he lived up to it in this one. This is the humanoid I was expecting in a series like this, one that could just take over on a moment's notice. Really nice to see, and like I said, Razork was also phenomenal. He's been very good across this entire series. He has been Fnatic's best player across this series so far. Nice to see Noah and June also be relatively, good. I think the combo of Zac plus Renata is, dangerous. It's very scary to watch Oscar jump in, land CC on a bunch of people, and then keep them together for a Renata ultimate, where then she can just make Ezreal a huge problem for their own team. It's actually a very, very interesting strategy, and I think they executed it well. June had one of his best games in a while. I think this Renata was very impactful, basically throughout the entirety of the game, and obviously Noah stepped up. Oscar was good. Zac's one of those champions that just feels, super useful every single time that we see him at the pro level. He's just a very good champion with a very strong kit, has a good laning phase, and is a great team fighter. Kind of does a little bit of everything you could want, and Oscar needs something that is relatively simple to pilot. I think Zac definitely fits that bill, but generally this was once again the jungle mid duo of Fnatic pushing this team forward as they have been all split long into this game number 5. And then for Mad, you actually had more momentum in this game than you would have thought. You had really good positioning and really good tempo. Once again, it's something that they really do well, and especially in the mid to late game, it's something that they have a very good idea of. I want to give a big shout out to the 3 young players on the bottom side of the map, Frescoe, Supa, and Alvaro, who I think all played really well here. Supa had a lot of damage. Sometimes that was a bit of a negative because of Renata ultimate throughout this game, but Alvaro had some phenomenal setups on the Maokai, and Frescoe was very, very relevant on the Karma throughout the entirety of this game. You wouldn't necessarily consider that to be one of the highest damage mages in the game, but there's a reason that I'm pushing so hard for her to be pick or ban at basically every level of competition. It's because she's Karma. She obviously helps out the team a ton, but those mantra Qs are genuinely going to delete squishies on the other side of the map. I mean, Hui took half, maybe over half from one mantra Q at some point in this game, and that was crazy to watch. It's very difficult to play into that, but unfortunately, their veteran let them down in this one. Elyoya is going to get my dead of the game for game number 4. He needed to be more clinical. Obviously, the smites were certainly a problem. Being able to give up all these objectives, not being able to secure the Baron in that pivotal moment was a disaster for Mad Lions, but the Xin Zhao play was also lackluster. The engages were not very good, and he was very useless in team fights down the stretch of the game, where, you had Karma and Ezreal and Maokai doing things. Even the Gnar had a couple of moments, but that Xin Zhao was just not there. He was by far the most useless player in this entire game, and he is the reason they lost. It's definitely disappointing, but if you walk out of this series and you end up losing this 3-2, having lost this series because Elyoya couldn't get his job done, that's a shock. He's the one player that you felt pretty good about. He has always been a player that has stepped up in big moments. He is a 3-time former champion at this level. The lights aren't too bright for him. You know that that's not the case, but it was definitely disappointing to see how he performed here. He's going to have to bounce back, but is he going to be able to do that, or is Fnatic going to be able to complete the comeback with a 3-2 series win? We're going to game 5. It is winner take all, and the loser goes home in the winter split. So who's it going to be? Well, the winner of game number 5 was Mad Lions. They are going to take game number 5. They're going to win this series 3-2, and they're moving on to losers finals, the semifinals. Top 3 for Mad Lions in the first split for 4 out of the 5 of these players. It is a miracle that they've been able to accomplish what they were able to accomplish. This game was quite interesting, honestly. Fnatic did a bit to be able to keep themselves in it, but at the end of the day, Mad Lions doing the same thing that they had done in games 1 and 3, except a little bit more so in this, outplaying Fnatic when it was in the later stages of the game. The macro, the team fighting stage, that's where Mad has excelled across this series. That's where Fnatic has faltered throughout this series, and that's exactly what happened here in game number 5. Fnatic was in a relatively good position. You had a strong Gwen on the top side of the map. Razork was everywhere he needed to be and was playing really active. You have gold on the Tristana and the Ezreal. You have a Karma to enable both of them, and it wasn't enough. You're getting pulled into separate situations. You're constantly grouping when things don't need to be grouped, and you're giving up objectives and losing fights to a team that, quite frankly, was better than you in this game. Credit to Mad Lions. It's everything you could want to see out of a young team, and then some, and they deserve this win. They deserve to be moving in to the top 3 Player of the game and player of the series as a whole for me is going to go to Frescoe in the mid lane, the mid laner for Mad, the player that I talked about in my primer only a month ago as, well, if there's one player that I'm not sold on being an immediate impact for Mad, I felt pretty good about Supa and Alvaro in particular, and Elyoya I had as my #1 jungler, and so, obviously those three being good, but Merwin, he's an aggressive player. Is he going to translate well? Top lane's really stacked in the LEC, but Frescoe, I didn't think he was going to be able to adapt as quickly, and I was very wrong about that. He has been great for this Mad Lions team. Basically, in any circumstance, he went up against Humanoid, who's having a phenomenal split, and he outplayed him in this series, and he deserves the player of the series. He deserves to be given credit and called out for how good he has been. He was crucial in this game number 5. The Azir damage in the back half of this game was great. Some of those Shuriman shuffles were game-winning from him, and if he's going to be able to keep up this trajectory, I've already talked about how good I think this bot lane is. It's been very well documented how highly Reddit thinks of the top side of this map, and Merwin, I love Elyoya. If Frescoe's also a top 4, top 5 player in his role at minimum, maybe top 3, that's huge for what Mad Lions is able to accomplish. That immediately puts them in the same tier as a lot of the teams that we have been talking about, like Fnatic, like BDS, like G2 in that zone. And so really good stuff from Frescoe, really good stuff from Mad. Elyoya continues to look great on engagers. The Vi was phenomenal here in Game 5. Supa and Alvaro pulling off the Senna lane very well. I'm loving Maokai support. I really do think it takes advantage of a lot of the really good ADCs in the meta right now, including but not limited to Senna, who Supa is very good at playing, and Merwin on Cassante was going to be a factor, but really when you're talking about how Mad was able to win this, they out-macroed Fnatic. This is a young team that was able to think ahead and really understand where they needed to be at any given moment, and they were able to take advantage of that. That was the story of their series, and that's the reason they are moving on to the semifinals now. But for Fnatic on the other side, disaster has struck. I think there's really no other way to put it. You really wanted to win this series. I think losing to Mad is definitely a disappointment. I think if I would have told you were getting 4th in the winter split in the preseason, you would have been like, maybe not what we want, but it's fine. Like, we're probably top 3. I don't think 4th is like the worst thing in the world. At least we made top 4, but I think this was a very winnable series for Fnatic on paper, and they just were not able to get the job done. Dud of the game in game number 5 for me is going to go to Noah in the bot lane. I don't even think he really's earned it all that much. I think that you could give this to Humanoid. I think you could give this to June, who is also very much responsible for some of these problems, but Noah's positioning in some of the late team fights were just not good enough. He had a lot of gold on the Ezreal. He was going to need to be a pretty big damage force for them, and he wasn't. He was consistently getting caught out, and that was a big problem for Fnatic. But again, really the big issue for them this game was their macro. It wasn't any sort of individual plays that these players made. It was the decisions that they made as a unit, whoever is making the calls on this team. And I don't know who that is. I don't know if that's Razork. I don't know if it's Humanoid. I don't know if it's June. I don't know who it is that is making the calls on this team, but they made bad ones, and honestly, that was pretty indicative of what Fnatic was doing all split long. That is definitely an area where they simply need to get better. I talked about how in the preseason, I thought this team would have been better off just running back all 5 members with Trimby in the support position. That, I'm not going to say that I definitely was proven right over the course of this split, because June hasn't been horrendous, but the macro of this team has gotten significantly worse now that they don't have a player like Trimby in this lineup. It honestly reminds me a lot of what they were playing like back at the beginning of last year. They just have more talented players around them. This team needs to figure out what they're going to do, because even with Razork having a good game, and with Oscar getting very strong towards the back half here on the Gwen, being able to actually duel basically anybody in the game, they're getting pulled apart in multiple different directions. They're getting out team fought, and they're getting out macro. And they're never going to be able to win a series against a top team when they play like this. It's just something that they need to fix. Lucky for them, it's still early on. Winter split is when you're supposed to be failing so that you can make adjustments for the more important splits down the line. Winter is definitely the least important, but for Fnatic, you want to see something better. Razork was great in this series and honestly tried his best to 1v9, but Humanoid had a couple of good games, a couple of bad ones. Oscar had a couple of good games, a couple of bad ones. Noah and June were just whatever, basically, the entirety of this series. They had a couple of good games, a couple of bad ones. Fnatic needs to get more consistent. I think that starts with figuring out what they want to do in terms of shot calling in the back half of games. Their early games are strong. They've got a lot to work on, though. And then for Mad, congratulations. You're moving into the top 3. You're taking on BDS in a series that we're going to cover right now on this channel. And so I don't want to talk too much right now. I don't want to, talk a lot because we've got a lot to talk about in terms of the Mad BDS series. But this was a massive win for them to be even in the top 3 at all. Like, after everybody was pretty much unanimously putting them 10th or F tier or whatever meme you want to put them. It's pretty amazing in their first split. But now that we know who's in the top 3, it's time to get into our semi-final series here in the LEC Winter Split. We are going to find out who's going to be meeting G2 in the Grand Finals, the LEC Winter Finals after this series. It's, of course, a matchup between Team BDS and Mad Lions Koi, who we just saw win their way into this spot. Of course, BDS coming from a much different pathway, and there is a lot to talk about surrounding BDS in this little preamble here. I'm definitely going to try to get to all of it, but they were undefeated in the playoffs up until they went against G2 in the Winners Finals. They got absolutely demolished, 3-0, swept. It was not particularly close. They never really felt like they were in the series at all. A couple of the players that had been performing really well for them this season really underperformed pretty majorly in that series. A lot of problems with macro had started being exposed, but it's G2, still one of the best teams, if not clearly the best team in the LEC. And so you're not freaking out too much about that loss, but they're going to need to get some of that confidence and momentum back in this series. But as we just saw with Mad Lions, this is certainly not a pushover. Compound the fact that BDS is currently not on a winning streak, having just been destroyed by G2. Their top laner, Adam, will not be playing in this series. Genax, their BDS Academy top laner, will be coming in. Of course, Genax having played for quite a long time in the LEC for SK Gaming. Certainly not somebody who is unfamiliar with this stage, although he was never particularly successful at this level, and so definitely a bit of a downgrade. But as we know, as of essentially the time I'm recording this, as the BDS series is ending, as the series we're talking about is ending, the reason that Genax is in and the reason that Adam is out is disciplinary reasons. Adam has continued some of the negative signs that he showed early on in his career on Fnatic. He was benched for toxicity. He was benched for disrespecting his teammates. He was benched for rage quitting scrims, for screaming at his coaches. Just all around toxic behavior. And, you know, quick plug, I tweeted about kind of my thoughts on this. I don't want to go too in depth on that kind of stuff on this channel. Not really what I want to use the time for in this video or these videos in general. But if you do want to get my quick reactions to these things, you can check out my Twitter. The link to that's obviously in the description. You can follow me there to get my quick reactions to stuff like this. But very quickly, this is a trend for Adam. This is obviously not a new thing that we're learning about him. And generally speaking, if you're going to be so toxic that your coaching staff can't work with you and that your teammates can't work with you and that there's no choice but to bench you in the semifinals when your team is, you know, one series away from making the LEC finals, then I'm sorry, you're just too toxic to be, you know, on a team. You know, part of being at this level is that you are a pro player, and pro stands for professional. And if you can't act like a professional, if you are causing rifts, if you are, you know, blowing up your team, I'm sorry, it just genuinely doesn't matter how good you are. You shouldn't be on a team. Like, if you're going to act like that, like I said in my tweet, I really hope he takes this opportunity to realize that this is a major problem for him and that he needs to go and, you know, figure this out, get some help, try to figure out where all of this stems from to become a bigger person. Because obviously, you know, you never want to live your life getting that angry at a video game. That's just never, even if it is your job, it's just never a circumstance that's ever going to be healthy for you. But in his current state, I understand benching him, and, you know, BDS is just going to have to move forward without him, and that's unfortunate because he is their best player. And so they're going into this with definitely a lowered bit of expectations, because you just don't really know what this team is going to look like after losing the player that they have played through for the last year and a half, essentially. So definitely a big series for BDS and Genax, but, you know, no expectations really on the top side. It's going to be up to players like Nuke and Ice and Labrav, who have been great throughout this split, to step up and prove that they don't need a strong top side in order to win games. But for Mad, obviously, their confidence is a bit higher. No weird roster drama. In fact, it's the opposite. All of these players clearly want to play together as five, and they just came off their biggest win as a unit. Are they going to be able to continue that? I would have predicted BDS pretty cleanly, like 3-0 or 3-1 before the Adam news. I'm switching it to BDS 3-2 after the Adam news. It's just really hard for me to say that BDS won't win because it's been such a clear top two, but this is not a sure thing. This is a very different team without Adam in the top lane. But that's the last time you're going to hear me mention him. I'm not really going to bring him up in these games because he's not particularly relevant in these games. But without further ado, we get to start with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Mad Lions. They are going to take another 1-0 series win. That's another game 1 win on their belt, this time on the red side. As we saw in the previous series, it was all blue side wins. I don't think I brought that up in that series, but that was definitely something to keep in mind, is that all 5 games were won by blue side. We get a red side win for Mad Lions in game 1 here, and it looks really good. Once again, it's macro. It's a big macro diff coming in from Mad. The fact that this team plays so well in the mid to late game is astounding. Obviously, their draft is very good here. Poor Gen X gets subbed into the LEC, and in his first game has to play up against Twisted Fate top. Not exactly the circumstance I would want to be put in the LEC, but at the same time, he just didn't quite live up to that there. Mad was very, very good across this entire game. Player of the game for me is going to go to Merwin on this Twisted Fate top. The gold difference in the top lane was very noticeable, and TF caused some major problems for BDS. When you look at this comp, you've got Talia and Twisted Fate. It's going to be hard to match the macro of Mad Lions. It's going to be hard to be able to answer side lanes in the way that, Mad is going to be able to do because of the mobility and the options that they have in their side lanes with their solo laners. And so, it's always going to be a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of BDS trying to win these front-to-back team fights, because they're really never going to be getting them, and that's kind of their specialty. But I think Mad still had to go out there and execute on that, and that's exactly what they did. Again, big ups to Merwin. I thought he was great this game. Big ups to Yoya, who continues to look really good. He was actually a little bit questionable in the Fnatic series. I think you could make the argument that Razork was better when they played against each other, but it's nice to see him go up against Sheo and actually exert a lot of that pressure that you would want to see. Frescoe was really good. Supa and Alvaro were really solid, but again, kind of similar to what I was talking about in the previous series for Mad. This felt more like a team effort than one individual player dominating. It's the macro, it's the decision-making, it's the late game of MBK that makes it so difficult for you to be able to match or beat them, and BDS really did not have an answer here. Yes, there was some gaps, like, top and mid, I think were definitely gapped here, but you still had to be able to execute and capitalize on the advantages that you were able to generate, and that's exactly what Mad did. For BDS on the other side, not a good game number 1. The macro just completely fell apart, and as much as we can sit here and blame Genax as somebody who hasn't had a ton of time to prep with this team and play with this team, and he did definitely get gapped individually in the top lane playing that Cassante into Twisted Fate, I honestly don't think he was the biggest problem on this team. I'm giving dud of the game to Nuke. He got dud of the game in all 3 games against G2 as well. He has not been stepping up in the best of 5s, and that is crucial for this team. His emergence over the course of the last year and a half is a big reason why BDS has been so competitive, and he's actually been very good for this team in the regular season across this year. He was great in the best of 3 stage, but so far in the best of 5s, he has been a disaster. And it's not even just his individual mechanics, which were bad. He got outplayed by Frescoe basically the entirety of this laning phase, but man, he made some horrible decisions in the back half of this game. You can tell that he's a lot more comfortable in the front-to-back team fighting stage of, the game in general. He's not really great at side laning, and that was very clear when he was just getting pulled in direction after direction and not really having any idea of what he was supposed to be doing in any given circumstance. That is a disaster for BDS, and Nuke simply has to be better if this team wants to be able to win games. If he plays the way that he did against G2 and in game 1 here for the rest of this series, this is not going to be competitive. He is a major piece, especially now that top lane is Genax. He's got to step up, and he did not in game number 1. Like I said, Genax did not survive in this top lane matchup, but I want to give him some slack. Again, he hasn't played with this team hardly at all. This was a decision made, as far as I know, just a couple of days ago, and so I'm going to cut him a bit of slack, but he also was not particularly good in this game number 1. Sheo was out-jungled, even if his scoreline doesn't look awful. Yoya had such a big impact on the map, and there was never really a circumstance in which Sheo was matching. Sheo has been the weak link of this team over the course of this split, and it showed here. Ice and Labrov were there. I mean, I love Labrov, and Ice has been super hyper consistent, but Supa and Alvaro looked awesome in game number 1. I don't think Ice and Labrov made major mistakes. They just kind of did their own Aphelios Tom Kench thing. You have an Azir Aphelios comp with this, with 3 tanks surrounding them. You want a front to back, and you just never were able to get to that spot. This felt like a draft diff in terms of mentality, and then a lack of execution coming in from BDS. They had no way to answer the side lanes of Mad, and they ended up falling because of it. They're going to have to be better. This is not an encouraging sign. If Mad's going to go up 2-0 in this series, I mean, the confidence of BDS has to be completely in the toilet at this current moment. It just feels very difficult for them to be able to come back, but it's not 2-0 just yet. It's still only 1-0. If BDS can tie up the series at 1 apiece, we saw that things could get a little bit dicey for Mad with Fnatic if they lose in the early game, and so definitely interested to see that, but BDS basically has to win this game number 2 for me to feel confident at all in them. Are they going to be able to do that? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Mad Lions, they are going to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and that is a commanding lead. We've talked about this basically every year that we've covered the playoffs for any region on this channel, but 2-0 is a pretty hard deficit to come back from. Winning 3 games in a row against a team that's already shown they can beat you twice, it's just a hard thing to do, and especially because it's not like Mad's a bad team. Winning 3 games in a row against Mad is already tough enough. To do it in such a pivotal circumstance with such weird circumstances surrounding your team as BDS right now, it just feels very unlikely for them. But for Mad, this is a massive win to go up 2-0. They continue to look amazing, and they continue to really be a well-oiled machine. A lot of the conversation surrounding this series is obviously going to be about, players who aren't playing, but let's talk about the good that Mad Lions is actually capable of doing. Every single player on Mad is playing really well right now, and played really well in this game. So much so that player of the game was really, really difficult to decide. I think a lot of people want to give it to Merwin because he makes a lot of the flashy plays in the back half of games, and I like Merwin. I think he has really evolved and stepped up over the last couple of weeks. Still is a player that I'm a little bit more hesitant on saying is like elite, just because he did have a couple of those bad games in the regular season when he really didn't need to, but man, is he stepping up when he needs to here in the best of 5s. But I'm going to give it to Elyoya on the Ivern. I think this champion, regularly goes undervalued, if only because it's not very flashy. The things that Ivern does aren't very big, but consistent CC, consistent shielding, and, generally great map awareness coming in from Elyoya made this a very difficult team to end up trying to fight into. Imagine fighting into an Azir, Xayah, Braum, Gnar, when they're ahead, and now imagine all of them have infinitely more CC and damage and shields, and also can't be auto-attacked because they're standing in a brush. Like, this game just becomes entirely unwinnable, and Elyoya did that. He was everywhere on the map, everywhere he needed to be. It's been a great start to the series for him, and he really has been gapping Sheo basically across the map. Really good stuff from him. But again, it wasn't just him, it was everybody. I already talked a bit about Merwin. Frescoe continues to look amazing in the mid lane. He is gapping Nuke. I mean, this is the Azir Corki matchup where you just hope to scale into the late game, and Frescoe's up in gold by like a lot by the time we hit 15 minutes. It's really impressive stuff. Supa and Alvaro, sorry, I talked too quick there. Supa and Alvaro were very, very good. I would argue they were better here than they were in game number 1, which is an even better thing to be able to say. It's just working right now for Mad Lions. I'm not saying that this is perfect and that nothing could ever go wrong for this team, but they are in such a commanding position, having gone up 2-0 in this series, that honestly, they are 1 game away from making it to their first finals as a unit. I mean, this organization has 4 rookies and they can make finals in their first ever split. That is ridiculous. You don't want to count your chickens before they hatch, but this is a pretty damn good look. And then for BDS on the other side, disaster. I mean, everything is going wrong, and it's hard to sit here and say that things might not have been different, but it doesn't really matter. Like, this is the circumstance you've been put in, and unfortunately, this is the reality of that circumstance. Gen X is going to get my dud of the game here, but it, again, really isn't just his problem. If he was the only player on this team that was underperforming, if the other 4 players were stepping up and playing in the same way that they did throughout a majority of the regular season, then this wouldn't be a conversation. BDS would at the very least be in these games, but because everybody else is also kind of underperforming right now, it's just not working out. I don't know if it's mental, I don't know if it's confidence, I don't know what it is, but things are just not working out. Sheo has been bad, like truly not good. A bottom half jungler for sure over the course of 2024 so far, which is regression from what he was last year, which is definitely disappointing to say. Nuke has just fallen off a cliff. Like, I get you're playing Corki, and this was probably his best game of the last 5, but this was the best game of his last 5. Like, did you watch this game? He was still entirely irrelevant, was not, even remotely on the same level as Frescoe in terms of what he was able to put out or keep up with in laning phase. It's just not great. Ice looked okay in this game, and Labrov had a couple of good hooks, but Labrov was also way too far forward in a lot of circumstances on a champion that he was consistently pulling bans for throughout this season. Things just aren't working out. Like, again, I can't sit here and say that it's all Gen X's fault, but you really do wish that you had a different top laner in this circumstance, or at least one that you felt more comfortable playing in a carry role, because it doesn't feel like anybody else on this team is in the position to be able to step up and actually win games for this team. For a team that looked like it was guaranteed to be top 2, you're now sitting 0-2 in the semifinals with the chance to go out in third, having not won a single best of 5. It's disappointing. I mean, to say the absolute least, it's disappointing. You got to be able to turn around. Obviously, that starts in game number 3, but if you're not able to win game number 3, then you just figure out what to do going into next split. I think that's really where the conversation honestly has started to be for BDS, which is really sad. But game 3 is obviously a must win. If they lose it, they are out. If Mad wins game number 3, they get to move into the finals to take on G2. And that would be massive for this org and for this team full of young rookie players that really wanted to play together. It could really show that the ERLs are worth investing in. Not that that hasn't already been proven, but continuously show that the ERLs are worth investing in. Big game here for Mad. Not as much pressure on them because they can lose it. They still have a couple lives to spare, but you probably want to close this out as soon as possible. So are you going to be able to close it out in 3 in a clean sweep, or is BDS going to keep the series alive with their first win? Well, the winner of game number 3 was BDS. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to keep this series alive, picking up their first win in the best of 5 stage of the playoffs. And man, was this game needed for them. We were talking about how it felt like momentum and confidence were just absolutely destroyed for this team with everything that is going on. But this is the kind of statement performance that they needed to make to show, no, we are still a team to be reckoned with. You cannot take us lightly because we can still outplay you in a lot of really important moments. And, we can take an aggressive Mad Lions team who was going for plays this game and who had a couple of players who were individually playing well and make it irrelevant. Say, no, actually, we can still beat you when you're playing like that. It doesn't matter. We're still a good team. Take us seriously. And that's exactly what this game 3 was. Really good for BDS. It, doesn't save you completely because you still have a lot of, weight on the line of these last couple of games. But, this was a great game number 3. And for Mad, again, not the worst thing in the world to drop game number 3 after winning the first 2. You do have kind of a leeway, a built-in leeway for yourself, but you probably would have liked to see this team actually win this game. They played relatively well, but them just being outskilled by BDS is certainly something to note and to monitor. But let's talk about it. BDS was awesome this game. Player of the game was honestly very difficult. I'm going to give it to Ice in the bot lane. Ice has been very good for BDS. This is yet another take that I just didn't really get right. I don't know how many zero tenacity Korean AD carries I need to get wrong before I just start believing that they're going to be very good at the LEC level. Both Noah and Ice have been able to make that transition at an incredibly quick, pace and at an incredibly high level. And Ice has been very good for BDS. Supa and Alvaro were, in my opinion, the best bot lane in the LEC in the regular season. I gave Supa my first team All-Pro at the AD carry role, but Ice was the only one who was kind of pushing him for that. And it's nice to see him step up on a champion like Ezreal that obviously he is very good at. We saw that in this game, and we've seen that from him in previous stints as well. Ezreal is clearly a champion he likes a lot, but he was phenomenal here. I mean, truly like a game-breaking teamfight Ezreal, and that's huge. You don't usually get that out of Ezreal. He's not usually a primary damage threat like he was in this game, but this was awesome from him. And the other player was Genax, who was so good in this game. Genax was awesome. He ends up picking Lee Sin top. Somewhere, Rascal was freaking out like, oh my god, my career is saved. I can pick Lee Sin top again. But jokes aside, like, it's really nice to see BDS counter with their own kind of weird top lane picks into something like the Karma, and I think Genax played it really well. He's clearly very comfortable with this pick, and he was massive in this game. They kept trying to invest into shutting this Lee Sin down, and he was playing so well in the top side that even in 1v2 situations, even when he was getting a lot of resources put his way by Mad, he was still able to survive, or at the very least generate a gold advantage in those situations, and he was very relevant in the back half of this game. A very good performance coming in from a player that, whatever you get from him is really house money on this team. So Ice and Genax really being the carries. I thought Nuke was definitely better here. Fresco was still looking amazing in that mid lane matchup on the Akali, but Nuke survived a bit better and was useful in fights. Sheo had much more of an impact, I would say, generally on the map as a whole, which is something we really wanted to see, even if Elyoya was still a bit better in terms of the active plays that he was making, and Labrav had some good engages on the Alistar, mostly was just dying so that Ice could actually team fight, which, you'll take that. You will absolutely take that trade 9 times out of 10, and so credit to BDS. Genax and Ice really stepping up to keep their season alive, their split alive here in game number 3. Everything you could have asked for from these two players. But for Mad, again, like I said, I'm not freaking out. The only thing that is a bit concerning here is that you did actually do all the things that you wanted to do and you still didn't win the game. That sometimes is a bit concerning because it's like, well, how much more can you throw at them? Is it more up to BDS whether they play right or wrong, whether you win this series? But, it's only one game, and especially with how dominant they were through the first 2, I'm not freaking out. There were still a lot of positives. Like I said, Elyoya and Frescoe are playing awesome in this series up until this point. Elyoya really is controlling the map in a way that I just don't think he is getting a lot of credit for. He's constantly looking for plays, even in situations where you wouldn't expect Mad to be in a position to play aggro, and I think Fresco's mechanics are just on point. His confidence is through the roof right now, and he is showing that off. Alvaro was pretty good this game, but top and bot really weren't winning. Merwin, Supa didn't exactly have a great game number 3 here. Supa's gonna get my dud of the game. I think you could give this to Merwin on the Karma in the top lane, where Lee Sin was just more effective, but Supa, I think, was just caught out a bit too much. The aggressive tendencies on the Kai'Sa, sometimes you can get away with them, and sometimes you can't. I still think he's a great Kai'Sa player, and Alvaro tried to bail him out with some, of the Renata W's every once in a while, but at the end of the day, Supa was just in some bad positions, and it ended up costing Mad some of these fights. He was getting caught out early, or alternatively, he was way too far behind and not really there to be able to fight in the mid to late game, so, you want to see more out of him in the future, but I'm not going to freak out again. Supa's been really good across this series up until this point. And again, maybe you want to see more from Merwin. I like Karma top. I think it's something that you can play, but just got outplayed by Gen X. I don't think Karma has necessarily the play style that you would want Merwin to be on after what he has shown in the last few games. You want him to be on something that can be a bit more aggressive, something that's going to be a bit more team fight oriented. I don't know if Karma is going to be that pick. I still love Karma, but perhaps, honestly, flex the Karma and the Akali here. I would love to see Merwin on the Akali and Fresco on the Karma. I think that would actually make this team comp a little bit more volatile in terms of how it ends up playing out, because you've got a more aggressive player on the more aggressive pick. But either way, I think Mad's in a relatively decent spot, still up 2-1 here. They still only need to win one of the final 2 games. However, you really probably don't want to drop game number 4. You don't want to give BDS the confidence of knowing that they can beat you. You don't want this to go to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, because that's when it starts to get dicey. That's when it starts to get a little bit more, a little bit more interesting, we'll say. So for BDS, hopefully you can win game number 4, push us to a game 5. That would be really fun, but for Mad, they definitely want to close it out here. So who's it going to be? Well, the winner of game number 4 was BDS. They are going to take game number 4. They're going to tie up this series at 2 apiece, and we are in preparation for a reverse sweep possibility here as we move in to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, the second one of this video. That's 10 games. We get the full 10 in today's video. You got to be excited about that, but BDS is able to pick up a massive win in this game, and for all the talk about confidence and momentum and perhaps it all being stilted now that the roster has changed and just not really knowing what this team is going to look like, perhaps this motivated them, and after game number 3, it really does feel like they are rallying around their new top laner and around what they are good at, which is playing for these front-to-back 5v5 team fights, allowing their AD carry to really dominate in these circumstances and giving their other players tools to playmake and really looking aggressive in that vein. For Mad, it's very much a concern at this point because you feel outclassed. This was the worst game that they played in this series, in my opinion. I still think that they had a lot of positives in this, and there still were a lot of really good things to say about what they were capable of doing in this one, but this was the first one where I was like, oh, BDS is beating you. Like, oh, you're kind of just losing this one. And so that is a concern. But for BDS, that's huge. Player of the game is once again going to go to Ice in the bot lane. He has been awesome in the back half of this series. 2 games of Ezreal, 2 games where he has carried in terms of damage. It's really funny because we talk about EU Ezreal all the time. Maybe not on this channel, but certainly the community talks about EU Ezreal and about how that champion just doesn't function in the same way at the European level as it does in like the LCK or like the LPL or anything like that. But man, to see a truly good Ezreal, it's such a joy. And Ice is a truly good Ezreal. Second game in a row where he was actually just able to carry a lot of the late game team fights. And that's just not something you see a ton from that champion in that circumstance. I'm really, really happy for him. He has been awesome. He has exceeded any expectation I could have possibly had for him at the beginning of the year, but it wasn't just him. Labrav really had a phenomenal game this time on the Rakan. He got back to his playmaking ways. You know, we had been praising him so much in the regular season. He was like an MVP candidate for me and was first team All-Pro support, in my opinion, the best support in the regular season. Really hadn't lived up to that in any of the games they had played in the best of 5. This was the best one that he had had by far. The creation ability of him, like the angles that he sees, it's massive when he is playing confident and when he knows what he wants to go for. Him and Ice were both terrific in this game. They won off of bot lane, and that is huge. For BDS, Gen X was also very good again, got blasted earlier in this game, was just super far down in gold, had absolutely no resources, looked like he was going to be a problem for BDS going into the back half, but man, those ultimates were clutch. He was so good in team fights, even without gold. He was so useful in this game. That's exactly what you want to see out of a top laner that may not have the most amount of like individual mechanical skill to win a 1v1 against a player like Merwin, who is very talented and aggressive. But, you know, if you go down, be able to do something about it, still be useful in the back half of the game. That's what you want to see from Gen X. There were some problems. Nuke died 3 times in like 44 seconds or something ridiculous. That was hilarious to watch, but you certainly don't want to see that from him. I mean, he was great the rest of the game, but that sequence of events was just kind of wild to watch. And, Sheo, I think, had a good game, but I still think he could be a bit more impactful in terms of the creation opportunities he has for the team. It really is up to Labrov to create a lot for them in the late game, but those are nitpicks. This was a really good game from BDS, and they played very solid basically from start to finish. And then for Mad on the other side, yeah, you're getting concerned. You're in reverse sweep territory, and you felt like the series was locked up after the first 2 games. It does not necessarily feel like that is the case now, moving into game number 5. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Alvaro in game 4 here. This was the first game where it felt like the engages that he was going for were too much, where it felt like he was a bit desperate to try and find some plays to try to close this game out, and it wasn't working. Supa and Alvaro kind of got outclassed here in game number 4. They have been a bit of a problem in the back half of this series. They're going to have to be better. Ice and Labrov were, the only other bot lane that I said were in contention for, these were the top 2 bot lanes in the regular season. And for Supa and Alvaro to be kind of not holding on to that momentum and that confidence in this series, that is a bit concerning. Ice and Labrov are just outplaying them at the current moment. Fresco, he was on the Karma in this one. Was fine, continues to be this team's best player. Merwin dominated the top lane matchup, but had significantly less of an impact in the team fights than Genax did, which is basically the opposite of what you want to hear. It doesn't really matter if you win lane if you can't turn it into anything, and so you'd love to see Merwin get a little bit more comfortable in that next game, and Elyoya, for the first time this series, didn't have as much pressure as his counterpart on the other side of the map in Sheo. There are real concerns here, and now you're going into this final game of the series, with a chance at finals on the line for all these rookie players, and the confidence, the momentum, it's no longer on your side. It has been stripped from you by BDS, taken, and you're going to have to counteract that. You're going to have to get it back. Of course, they still can win this game number 5, but it is a much closer gap in terms of mental than it was before we went into the series. I'm super excited for it. Both of these teams consider this a must-win. If BDS can get to the finals without Adam, that is a major, major selling point for them. And if Mad Lions can get to the finals with 4 rookies, that is a major selling point for them. Both of these teams really want to win this series, but who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 5 was Mad Lions. They are gonna take game number 5. They are going to regain control of the series, and in doing so, they are gonna push their way into the 2024 LEC Winter Split Finals. A team of 4 rookies has come together, and they are gonna be a top 2 team in split number 1 as a unit together. It's one of the most miraculous stories that we've seen in the LEC. Obviously, things have not gone according to plan in the LEC for many years now. I think the only predictable thing about the LEC in terms of standings in the last couple of years is that nobody knows what's going to happen. There is no analyst who has gotten anything really right consistently with this region, and that is absolutely the case with Mad. From F tier to the finals. The F stood for finals, I guess, the whole time. Pretty crazy. Even I had them number 10. Now, granted, in my primer, to give myself a little bit of slack, it was more of a confidence ranking than a power ranking, but there is no world in which I would have ever believed you if you told me Mad made finals in their first split. This is ridiculous. Congratulations to this team. Obviously, congratulations to the players. They very much earned it, but big ups to the coaching staff, who has truly been phenomenal. The drafts have been great. Obviously, the preparation is fantastic and phenomenal for them. They've just been everything you could have asked them to be at the beginning of this year, and then some. They're a top 2 team in Europe right now, and nobody could have seen that coming. For BDS, you gave it your best shot. Man, this was a close-ish game number 5. I mean, it really was Mad that kind of controlled the back half of this game. Once things started to spiral, they just kept spiraling for BDS. But, for a team that made a pretty big roster substitution, for a team that took their best player and benched him right before the semifinals, for that team to go to 5 games still in that series, it's very impressive. I don't know what the future holds for BDS. There's a lot of conflicting reports online about whether or not this is a temporary substitution, but it's still a massive series for BDS to show that, no, we deserve to be here in the first place, even if we didn't necessarily take it home in this series. So let's talk about it. Player of the game and player of the series as a whole is going to go to Merwin, the top laner for Mad Lions. This was a name-defining series for him. I'm not going to say that, he is kind of a made man after a series like this, but I think definitely he's on everybody's radar now. If he was kind of, where is he going to fall on kind of the top laner rankings at the beginning of the year? I think that was a very realistic question to ask. Now, I really don't think that conversation is there anymore. He really has been very good for this team. Yes, there have been inconsistent moments, and I've called those out, but especially as this team has gotten into some more important games, not only has he been really good on some of the off-meta picks, the Twisted Fade, or, the Akali, or what have you in these best of fives, but he's been good on the standard top laners. He's been good on Gnar. He's been good on Cassante. He has been able to play these kind of weak side top laners at a really high level, and he was amazing in this game. Once again, dominated in lane, and I think that's been the really impressive part, is just how good he is isolated in 1v1 matchups. An incredibly talented player. He is very volatile. There are going to be circumstances in which he maybe isn't as productive as some of the other top laners on a game-to-game basis, but for the most part, you've got to look at him as a positive. Fresco is the other player that you're walking away from this series feeling incredibly good about. He outplayed Nuke basically every single game, maybe with the exception of game number 4, but I mean, truly, he didn't have a bad game in this entire series, and he was so good against Fnatic as well. For the two players that stood out the most for me on Mad to be the two players that I was the most concerned about going into the year, it's the most comforting thing you could possibly hear as a Mad Lions fan, because it's not like the other 3 players that you did feel comfortable about played poorly. Elyoya had a great series. He was definitely better than Sheo. I would argue he played much better here against BDS than he did against Fnatic in the previous series, which is big, major jungle gap all series long, basically no matter who he was playing. And Supa and Alvaro were really good too. Ice and Labrov definitely generated a lot more momentum in games 3 and 4, and maybe you could have hoped for a better series from the bot lane, but this is the worst they've looked, and they still were very good in 3 out of 5 games in this series. That's how good this bot lane has been. Arguably one of the best in the LEC. This team is a genuine team. This is not a fluke. This is not, a flash in the pan. They deserve to be here in finals. With everything that's going on in the LEC, they have passed every single test that has been given to them, and now they are sitting here in the finals in year 1 against G2. And then for BDS on the other side, obviously, maybe things are different if circumstances are different, but circumstances weren't different. And so here you are, you were 1 game away, even with all the chaos, even with all the carnage. That's something to be applauded for. I, again, don't know what the future holds for BDS. I don't know if they're going to be able to go back to Adam in the future, but Gen X actually played really good down the stretch. Once he found his footing, I think he really started to find his footing. He's a really good team fighter, and that was always kind of the scouting report of him on SK Gaming as well, as he was never able to get these gigantic leads, but a pretty reliable top laner that could win you games, and that's exactly what he was here for BDS. He was great here in game number 5, he just didn't have enough juice to be able to win it. Dud of the game for game 5 to me is going to go to Sheo in the jungle, and honestly, he's a bit more of a concern to me than whatever the top lane position is going to be for this team. He wasn't great in the regular season. He was good. Like, I don't want to say that he was bad. You don't, play on the #1 team in the league for most of the regular season if you're a bad player, but he really didn't have to do all that much in the regular season. And man, when we got to the best of 3s, best of 5s, he really started underperforming. He was not good in this series. Elyoya very much gapped him, and it just feels like a step back for Sheo after all the good things he was able to show in 2023. I'm not counting him out or writing him off or saying that he needs to be benched or anything like that, but that's definitely an area where you need to look and say, like, do we think we have a top 3 to 4 player at that role? If not, that's definitely going to be a bit more of a problem for a team that does want to compete for a title. I mean, truly, that's BDS's expectation at this point. Ice and Labrov were significantly worse here in game 5, but they carried games 3 and 4, and so I don't want to sit here and freak out, especially game 4, where both of them were phenomenal. And then Nuke's got a lot to figure out. He was better as the series progressed, but man, that G2 series, last weekend was really rough, and he started off this series incredibly rough as well. He was not consistent at all. Jungle mid was honestly, in my opinion, the biggest problem for BDS in this series, and you had a substitute top laner, so there are things that need to be addressed. There are things that need to be fixed for BDS. The consistency absolutely needs to improve, but even being here and in this circumstance in the first place, like, they were clearly one of the 2 best teams in the league throughout most of the regular season. They just weren't able to get the job done in the playoffs. I have faith in this organization, and I have faith in these players to be able to rebound. I would expect them to continue to be one of the best teams in the LEC moving forward in the year. It's just winter split wasn't it for them. This series was the end of it. And then for Mad, like I said, congratulations to them. That's the only thing I can really offer is my congratulations for how good this team has been. They have been everything they could have been asked to be, and then some. Merwin and Fresco are amazing. Elyoya, Supa, and Alvaro are great. This Spanish roster has very much come together, and they're going to make the finals a really, really interesting prospect. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC round 3 and round 4 or semifinals or quarterfinals or whatever you want to say overview and analysis video. It gets very difficult in terms of how this bracket ends up laying out to describe what the rounds are, but you guys know it's the last 2 series before the finals. It's the semifinals. That's just what we'll call it. I do appreciate you guys sticking around. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Of course, you can see our finals are coming up. I'm getting this video out on a different day on the weekend. I usually try not to post on weekends, but I had to post it here because I wanted to get this video out before G2 versus Mad Lions tomorrow. I'm so incredibly excited to see where this series goes with how good Mad has been in the last couple of, days and weeks. They can make this series interesting. G2 are definitely going to go in as big favorites, but who knows, maybe Mad could score an upset. My prediction, G2 3-0. I mean, come on, it's G2. They feel super dominant right now. I just don't think that there is anybody in the LEC that is on their level in terms of what they're going to be able to compete at. Yike and Caps feel like the 2 single best players in the region at the current moment, and it's not like Broken Blade, Hansama, and Mickey X are pushovers by any means. This team is just clicking on all cylinders. Like I said, their talent gap is huge, but if MDK can swing a game or 2, I'm not going to be hugely surprised. Now, if MDK goes out and wins this series, that's going to be a major upset, the biggest one of the playoffs by far, but I would be very surprised if that happened. But of course, let me know if you agree with that assessment. Do you agree that G2 should be such heavy favorites going into the finals, or has MDK shown you something in these Fnatic and BDS series that gives you the confidence that they can go toe-to-toe with a team like G2? I would love to know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below, obviously on that, but also on today's games, just how you felt about everything and how you feel about the teams that maybe got eliminated as well. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LEC on this channel, although at the current moment it does feel like it with 3 or 4 LEC videos a week because of playoffs, but we post about all 4 of the major regions, the LCS, LEC, LCK, and the LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week on this channel. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.